So the commander of Overlord is Dwight Eisenhower. Marshall had wanted the job, but Roosevelt, and this is you can get a sense of how crafty Roosevelt is or manipulative, said to Marshall, George Marshall, I can't sleep well at night if you're not here. He wanted to keep Marshall in Washington overseeing the war and the war in the Pacific too, and let Eisenhower be the point person in Europe. And Marshall, being the good soldier that he was, agrees. Very sadly, he's very disappointed, but he recognizes reality of the situation and he bows to Roosevelt's wishes. Uh, Eisenhower is a brilliant. He, I think most historians would agree that he was as good at diplomacy as he was at being a general. He has to hold together this coalition of kind of resentful British soldiers and airmen and navy, and there's the French and there's the Poles. And Eisenhower actually works extremely hard to make sure that the coalition army works as a unit. He doesn't just basically come in and say my way or the highway. Uh, he's very diplomatic in making sure that the coalition works together. This is not a small thing. Uh, his job was actually probably more important in diplomacy as it was in military, in terms of keeping this kind of unwieldy coalition together. But he did get into a big fight with Churchill. Um, Eisenhower wanted control over the heavy bombers that were starting to pound Europe from England and then from Italy. And this was another advantage to the Italian campaign, that the U.S. gained airfields in Italy and could bomb Germany from these positions. And he learned that Churchill did not want to give him command of the bombers. The British had control of that area, of that arm of the military, and they had controlled the strategic bomber force. And the British, again, are trying to put a stop to the cross channel invasion because they believe that Germany can be bombed into submission and that there was no reason to invade Europe through Overlord, which is the official name of D-Day, and that if the British have control over the bombers that are taking off from England and Italy, that Hitler can be defeated in this way. Well, Eisenhower thought that was ridiculous, and he was correct. I don't think there's any way that the Germans would have been bombed into submission unless the nuclear weapons had come online. It's kind of interesting. So, nuclear weapons come online just, I think, a little bit after Germany surrenders to the Allies. So it's funny about the timing. Again, all this stuff seems inevitable. And then a lot of people have argued that the U.S. would have never bombed Germany because of racism, that it would have never bombed Europeans, and that the U.S., as we know, uh, uh, hated Japan. There was a racial component there. Didn't think twice about bombing Japan. It's very unclear to me. I think that had the bomb come online while Germany was still fighting, I think the U.S. would have bombed Germany. We'll never know. But to go back to Eisenhower before D-Day, he takes it so seriously that he wants control over the bombing of Europe, that he threatens to resign. He threatens to resign, and unless he gets control over the heavy bombers, and Churchill has to back down. Has to back down because he knows when push comes to shove, Roosevelt is going to back Eisenhower, and he doesn't want push. Churchill doesn't want push to come to shove because it would be very embarrassing. Because it would be the differences in the British, their reluctance to invade Europe, the U.S.'s eagerness to invade Europe. Churchill has managed to kind of diffuse this and hide this, and he doesn't want this to become public. So basically, Eisenhower calls his bluff. So Eisenhower could be tough when he needed to be tough, but but so but he also knew that Roosevelt would back him. So it was fairly easily. He didn't want to push it that far, but he felt it was so important, and Churchill had to back down. Now, the other aspect is I talked about this second landing in Marseille in southern France, and you can see it on the map here. Churchill was completely against it. It was called Operation Dragoon, and Churchill would just bang away at Roosevelt and bang away at Eisenhower. Churchill did not want this invasion of southern France. Now, the reason the Americans wanted it is, and they proved quite correct actually, that the Normandy invasion stalled, and what the Allies needed, they needed a second conduit into France. Now, Operation Dragoon doesn't happen until August of 1944, but what it did was it opened up a second front in France, which turned out to be extremely important in the ability to defeat the Germans. But Churchill doesn't want it. He's arguing with Eisenhower. He's arguing with Roosevelt. Roosevelt had felt like he'd promised Stalin that he would invade France from two directions, and he just won't back down. He just won't back down. And Dragoon happens, and it turns out to be very, very successful. So this is kind of the buildup to D-Day. It's the less known aspect of D-Day. The schisms in the Allied plans about how to defeat Hitler. Like I said, Churchill was right in one important respect. The Americans wanted to move too fast. But in other very important respects, the Americans were right. A cross-channel invasion was clearly the way to defeat Hitler, and creating that second front in France against Churchill's opposition was also very, very significant in the ultimate defeat of the Germans. So, what seems like, from the point of view of 2019, aspects of the decision to invade Europe, it seems inevitable that it had to have gone this way, weren't at the time inevitable at all. There were real stresses and strains in the relationship between the British and the United States over the question of how to create a second front. But ultimately the U.S. prevailed, because by the spring of 1944 and into the future, the U.S. was just the far, far more powerful partner.